Are you ready for some action? Watch this video because it's round 8 of Norway Chess. We are going to have a look at the game of Gukesh, 17-year-old super grandmaster from India, against Norway's number 2, Aryan Tari. And this game is really interesting. It starts very quietly with the so-called London system. But don't worry, it will become really sharp with a lot of fascinating tactical ideas. And on top of that, you will learn also how to use a passed pawn, or even better, connected passed pawns. So bear with me and let's have some fun. Before we go to have a look at the game, make sure to subscribe to the channel. After the move bishop f4, d5 was played, and now after e3, g6, knight f3, bishop to g7, knight bd2, castling, c3, b6. Very typical way of developing the pieces for both sides. Probably black is intending to go bishop b7, maybe play c5. Both sides are ready to complete their development. So here, the most natural move for white would be to play bishop e2, ready to castle kingside and take it from there. That's how the London system used to be played 20 years ago. Now, in modern times, we know that when there's a fianchetto, there's also a hook. And there are ideas of trying to open up the king's position. And therefore, Harry the h-pawn is there. h4 played, very interesting move. And at first it may seem as white is not really going to create something yet at the moment. But white has a very concrete idea in mind. Black played c5. And now white went for the move knight e5. Very ambitious developing move. The knight comes into the center. And now after knight bd7, the idea is that bishop e2 is only played now, with the idea of playing h5, trying to open up the h-file. So then you see that white consciously has refrained from castling kingside yet. And who knows, there are serious attacking ideas. Maybe the queen will come to c2 after taking on g6. Maybe there are knight sacrifices on g6 as well. A lot of pieces can potentially hit the black king. So therefore, black wanted to stop the h-pawn, played here the move h5. And now, interesting moment, knight c6, attacking the queen. And the queen doesn't have many squares to go to, can only come to e8. Looks as if black's queen is really badly placed, but on the other hand, that knight on c6 also doesn't have that many great squares to go to. And therefore, Gukesh played here the move b4. Very interesting move, so that the b-pawn is ready to help out the knight in case it comes under threat. How should black try to complete its development? That is the big question. Very logical move would be here to play bishop b7. That's absolutely fine. But the move played by Tari is very ambitious, as he went for the move knight to g4, opening up the diagonal for this bishop. And now you see that a lot of black's pieces, they are trying to gain control over the e5 square, to open up the position with the move e7, e5. If that happens, seems to me that black will be in great shape. But so far things are under control. A lot of things can still happen. White castled. Also interesting, because we would have expected some sort of a kingside attack. But now the h-pawn has been stopped, cannot be pushed any further. It's time to get the king into safety. And note that in case of something like bishop b7, there's always b5, and the b-pawn supports the knight. But more consistent follow-up here for black, once you have played the move knight g4, is here the move e5, opening up the center and hoping that at some point the queen will leave the back rank. Maybe the bishop comes to b7, and then eventually the rooks will be connected. If that happens, I think black will have an excellent game. How should white react here? Well, that's a very good question. There are possibilities to take on e5. For instance, you can take with a knight. But in such a case, black gets exactly the opportunity to untangle. And I think if someone is better, it's probably black, because the pawn on c3 is a little loose as well. So that's something which can rather be avoided. And therefore, the move bishop g3 was played. No need to remove your pawn from d4 yet. It's well protected by its own pawns. So black thought now it's time to get rid of that knight on c6. And the move queen e6 was played, attacking the knight on c6 with the queen. Very understandable move, but we will see that the queen is a bit unfortunately placed on that square, and probably more precise would have been just to play bishop b7. Develop your minor pieces before anything else. So let's go to the game. Queen e6, and now the move b5 played. So the knight is nicely supported by the b pawn, but the next move is bishop to b7. Very logical move, and black is about to win a pawn by taking twice on c6. But very likely the following move was overlooked or at least underestimated by the black player, because now the move c4 was played. And this is a very nice way of indirectly supporting the knight on c6, because if you do take the pawn on c4, you can of course recapture with the bishop, but even more powerful here is to play the move d5 to attack the queen, to support the knight on c6 one more time. And the main point is that the pawn cannot be taken because of a huge knight fork on e7. You are winning the queen. After moving the queen away, white has the choice either to recapture with the bishop or the knight on c4, retaining a very nice advantage thanks to that pawn on d5. It is already a passed pawn, and that knight on c6 is a really unpleasant piece to deal with for black. So therefore, rather than capturing that pawn on c4, black thought, let's take that knight on c6. Bishop takes, b takes, and now I think Tari was really struggling to figure out all the consequences of the huge tension in the center, and he could have taken the pawn on c6. That looks like a very natural move, but he reacted it because of c takes d5. And now the pawn looks very strong. You're attacking the queen, and the pawn cannot really be taken because of the move bishop f3, and it's a skewer. If the queen moves, then the rook on a8 is hanging. But interestingly, there is no need to capture the pawn on d5. And after something like queen b7, things are not that simple. Black will have to deal with this passed pawn, the pawn on d5. If it cannot be taken, it's there. It's kind of unpleasant to deal with. In the meantime, black does have some counterplay against that pawn on d4. So who knows? That looks like an interesting double-edged position. But Tari thought, let's play here the move knight df6 first to get the knight to a more stable square, and the pawn on c6 is not running away. Can you see here the best move for white? That's the big question, because the following move is an absolute shocker. It's the key move in the game. As white played here, the move e4. And this is a unique situation in the center, because look at these pawns. They are standing together, but black cannot avoid that white will end up with a pawn on d5. Because if you do take the pawn on e4, white is going to play the move d5 with a passed pawn on d5, and it's protecting the pawn on c6. This is huge news. This is very difficult for black already. And any other capture will also allow white to capture himself on d5 or advance the pawn. In the game, there followed the move knight takes e4, aiming for simplifications. But after c takes d5, you're attacking the queen, and the knight is now hanging. Black has to recapture with the queen. Knight takes e4, queen takes e4. Looks as if everything is still under control, and the pawn on c6 is even threatened to be taken, as well as the pawn on d4. But the key move is the move d5, and you see that black is a pawn up, but these two pawns on d5 and c6, they are really far advanced and very difficult for black to get rid of them. Black tried here to move knight f6, attacking the pawn on d5 with both the queen and the knight. And you wish, as white, that you could push the pawn. But if you do that, you're going to lose that pawn on c6. So don't do that. Be patient. And a very typical strategy whenever playing with connected passed pawns or with passed pawns in general, just make sure that the other pieces are going to support these pawns. And therefore, before we push the pawn, we play here the move bishop f3. Bishop attacks the queen. Queen got a move. It went to f5. And now, only now, the move d6 is played. And here you see the pawns are moving up the board and things start to look more and more dangerous for black. But black played here the move e4, trying to disconnect the bishop from supporting that pawn on c6. Only square where the bishop can go to is e2. And now black played here the move knight d5, opening up the diagonal for the bishop, threatening the rook. But the rook just comes to c1. That's a very simple move, just getting out of any potential knight forks. If black is going to play knight c3, which is possible because the bishop does protect the knight on c3. You can think about very funky exchange sacrifices, but the simple move queen d2 is just good enough. Instead, the move knight b4 was played, which does threaten the pawn on c6. Therefore, the pawn goes to c7. Look at these pawns. They seem absolutely unstoppable. It's very difficult to neutralize these pawns. You may consider to block them with your queen, but that's not really gonna help in the long run because it's a light square and white has a light squared bishop. So white will try to find ways to push the pawns even further or remove the blockading piece. So black tried here the move bishop d4, and that seems to make a lot of sense because now white is no longer able to play d7 as the queen on d1 doesn't cover the d7 square. So in case of d7, the black queen will just take it. But now you understand what white is trying to accomplish. White wants to get the d pawn on the 7th rank as well. So white played the move queen a4. So now the queen is controlling the d7 square once again. And imagine if you have a pawn on d7 and on c7, you're just one square away from giving up your protected passed pawns. You push them, black will be forced to give up a rook for 2 pawns. But then, okay, you have no longer your passed pawns, but you have an extra hook. And that should just be an easy win, easy to convert. So black played here the move a6 with the idea to play very soon the move b6, b5. But there are a lot of ways of playing here. You can take it slowly here with something like rook fd1, which perfectly fits in the scenario I described earlier, that you would like to let the other pieces support the passed pawns as well. But Gukesh had calculated very precisely and instead decided to play here this move d7 anyway. The queen still protects the pawn on d7. d8 queen or c8 queen is a big threat. So black's idea here is to play the move b5, disconnecting the queen from the pawn on d7. But can you see what is white's idea now? Because if the queen is just going away somewhere, let's say it goes back to d1, black is going to take the pawn on d7, and that would be very bad news for white. But the key move here is a beautiful bishop sacrifice. Bishop takes b5 with the point that after a takes b5, you're able to sacrifice your queen with the move queen takes a8, removing a very important defender of the back rank. And of course, if you do take the queen, now you have the chance to play here the move d8 queen yourself. With check, black is forced to take on d8, but then after c takes d8, it is absolutely game over. White has 2 rooks versus a knight. That's absolutely game over. Therefore, black has to do something about these huge pawns. Cannot take the queen. There's no time for it. Queen takes d7 played, and okay, you're an exchange up as white, but you no longer have your connected passed pawns. But the queen can take this very important pawn on e4. The queen is back in the game, materials even, and the c pawn is still alive as it's still beautifully supported by the bishop on g3. But black is going to take the pawn on a2. That's also an important move, attacking the rook on c1. And if white's going to play too slowly, maybe at some point these 2 passed pawns, connected passed pawns, they can become a serious factor as well. But first things first, White's going to play rook c e1. So the rook is on the open file and will try to find a way to enter black's position. For instance, if you go play knight c3, which was not played in the game, but it's a beautiful move, then white is going to play the move queen b7, so that the queen is going to support the passed pawn as well. And if, let's say, black is now going to play something like b4, hoping that everything is under control, but now a huge move here, rook e7, deflecting the queen. And if you do take the rook, then it's c8 queen, with the point that if black is going to take, you're not going to capture the rook, but you're going to take the queen on e7 and it's game over. So that is the idea of this move, rook e7. That would be a beautiful idea. But now you understand why the rook is so important on e1. Black played bishop f6 as the bishop tries to cover the entry square on e7. But now the rook is no longer needed on the e-file. It goes to d1. So you're attacking the queen. The queen doesn't have that many great squares and the bishop goes back. And of course, black would be glad to see a repetition of moves. But look at this. Queen c2. The queen is going into the wrong direction, as you may think. But the knight on a2 is in trouble. And if it moves to c3 to attack the rook on d1, there is this move queen takes c3, as the bishop is pinned and therefore not a good defender. If you take it, it's rook takes d7, game over. The same basically for the move knight b4, the only other square where the knight can go to, as it runs into the move queen takes c5. Another beautiful way to exploit the pin on the d-file. After bishop takes queen, it's rook takes d7, rook enters, and it's going to be game over very soon. Then, after queen c2, black has to defend the knight on a2 with the move queen to e6, but now the rook, the other rook, comes to e1, hitting the queen. The queen got to keep the knight defended. Queen goes to c4, but now it's time to simplify. Queen takes c4, b takes c4. Maybe you think how I'm going to promote this pawn, but look, these guys, they calculated fantastically. Bishop d6, trying to capture the rook. The rook has to move, went to c8 to block the pawn, and now the killer move, the decisive move, after which Tari resigned, is the move bishop takes c5. Once again, exploiting the pin on the d-file. After bishop takes c5, it's rook d8, and black is unable to maintain the blockade of the passed pawn, as it's a check. After rook takes d8, there would be c takes d8, getting a new queen, and it's game over. So therefore, after the move bishop takes c5, black's position is falling apart and white will be a lot of material up. Therefore, black resigned. I thought this game was very instructive with a lot of tactical ideas, also positional ideas on how you can support your passed pawns in general. So I hope you really enjoyed this game. Thanks for watching. Give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and we'll be back with new content very soon.